folks. This is Bill Pollock. He's the maven, the founder, the everything of No Starch Press, which puts out books ranging from subjects like Lego to, I don't know, JavaScript and everything in between. And a fair number of the books they put out are about open source. So Bill, is publishing books about free and open source software different than putting out books about, I don't know, Legos?
Or Clippy.
Clippy.
Yeah, Clippy's Guide to the Universe. Remember, one of our future bestsellers. So the thing for me is first off, when I pick a book to do, I basically choose something that I think is interesting.
Right.
And I think that I've been doing Linux books since probably, 1997 when we did the No BS Guide to Linux. I think that's when we did that. And we also did like a guide to the internet when it was basically, something that geeks used and still is, except people don't necessarily like what they're using today. So the thing about Linux stuff for me and like open source stuff is I don't necessarily care whether the tool is free, open source, or commercial if it's interesting. But I find with a lot of, I really enjoyed, for example, working on how Linux works recently because I'm a Linux user and I like to own and kind of control the systems that I'm working on. So for me, there's a lot of motivation to do books like that because I can actually, like most Linux people, if I have a problem, I can fix it. So the same thing in editing the books. If I don't understand something, I can search it. What my experience with, for example, in books about Microsoft stuff, and I have done very few Microsoft-oriented books, is that I can't answer any questions. I can't figure out what's going on. There's like a whole lexicon I have to learn before I can even understand the thing. So I'm working on 2 Microsoft-oriented books now, and they're just they're frustrating for me because it's like it's like a giant mystery. Whereas like Linux, I could just open it up, look at the file system, see what's going on, take care of it. Open source tools. I use LibreOffice to do most of my writing. I won't use LaTeX because I think it's a terrible editor. It's a nice layout program and amazing. It's an amazing achievement, but I'm not going to edit in LaTeX. But I use LibreOffice because I can control it. So the experience of editing these books is that I can address things. I can figure out if something actually makes sense. I feel like I can find like a more definitive. I can do more definitive work to figure out whether I can do deeper work to figure out definitively whether something is correct or not. So,
this is a boast, but it's true. The very first book written entirely in LibreOffice predecessor, and that was OpenOffice 641, the first usable
right.
OpenOffice build.
Right.
I wrote it.
We used OpenOffice for one book, and my staff will never allow me to use it again for book publishing.
Really?
Well, the problem is I'm the one that forced the issue. I'm like, I use this all the time. Surely it'll be fine. The difference when you've got staff that's trained to make everything on the page look perfect and be in the right spot, it can be really frustrating to use something that isn't a dedicated layout tool. And I didn't actually see that, but basically like their thing was they'd make a change, something would shift, they'd have to check the pagination again. It drove them crazy, and they basically said, we're not doing this again. So that's fine. We used to use FrameMaker.
So what do they use? What does your staff use?
They prefer InDesign. I did books in FrameMaker for years because I could do stuff like, with keyboard commands and make stuff work beautifully. And but the thing is that I've got my editors are editors first. So I'm not going to make them use a tool that is inefficient for them and that they can't control. And that's the thing. That's their thing. So if it were up to me, I would continue using FrameMaker. It's like I used to be able to pour chapters into pages and have pages done in like 45 minutes. I don't actually know what they do now to get things to the end, but like if I derail it and say, use this tool, and then they're like, you told us to use that, that's why this is broken, the next time around it's going to be like, fine, use the tool you want to use.
Okay, but that's the layout. That's producing the book, right?
Oh, right. I don't touch that piece of the puzzle. I just work on the editorial side.
But on the editorial, I write, the projects I'm doing now, which are collaborative across the world,
right?
We are using Google Docs.
The issue for me with large, long form stuff with Google Docs is like I do a lot of restructuring, and I don't want to have to wait for any kind of refresh. So that's why I use LibreOffice on Linux. and it's fast. And I can run. And what's also funny, of course, is that Word runs much better under Linux than it does under Windows. Like it starts fast.
Wait, did you just say Word runs better
on Linux under Wine? Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So if I'm forced to use Word, I'll just open it under Wine, as long as I haven't screwed something up, which also happens. Like it was working fine until I don't know what I did. But in my experience, Word under Linux runs actually really well.
Okay, no, that's nice to know. I mean, I've been writing professionally for 30 years, and I have never owned Word or Microsoft Office ever.
Just get like any old version of Word. You can get like something bundled in Microsoft Works or whatever from 5-6 years ago. It doesn't really matter. Like Word 2007, and install it under Wine or install it under Play on Linux. You might have to tweak it a little bit to get it to work right, but once it works, it opens fast. It's actually not a bad experience. Run it under Windows and like stuff is happening. This thing is launching. Do you want to do this? Clippy pops out from the, flash, like here's back from the dead. It's like, I think you're brushing your teeth. Do you want help brushing your teeth? Whatever random thing pops out.
Wait a minute. You're saying they got Clippy again?
No, I don't know. I'm just making it up.
I don't know what they do. I mean, I went from OpenOffice to LibreOffice, and I use LibreOffice, and I have written and edited books, not for no Starch, but for others. Yeah. And the people on the other end used Microsoft Word.
Right.
We got through it. It was not a problem.
Yeah, that's what my staff will typically do, is that there have been issues with importing. And so we're doing most of the land in InDesign. And again, it's because unless it's a straightforward technical book, which might be done in LaTeX, we do sometimes do books in LaTeX or similar, and we have a template for that. But the majority of things they're going to probably do in InDesign because they're trying to place things accurately. And for me to get them trained up, and I have 5 people doing layout, for me to train them all up in LaTeX so that they're not complaining like, we can't get this to work, this doesn't, this image takes up half the page and the page is short. Like, I'm not going to make them into LaTeX experts, but I can bring someone in a month, they're doing layout and InDesign. So
okay.
I do my editorial work in LibreOffice. Many of my authors will prefer to use Word, and we interconvert it. Basically, as long as you're using a current version, it seems to work fine. Sometimes sometimes it screws up because Word has this weird thing where you can, if people insert a caption in an image and then you start editing it with track changes, like something really weird happens. And then it also works with compressed file formats, which can also be weird. So if something doesn't, and then the whole file is warped. But that's getting back to your original question about editing stuff that's open source. Like I like it when I've got people who are like, I only use open source tools. That's fine. Use LibreOffice. Don't send me stuff in LaTeX. And I prefer that you don't send it in Word. Then I know that for the most part, unless someone's got some weird setup, things are going to work. I'd rather stay in that ecosystem. So I'm very happy.
Here's something I'm going to tell you. I've done not so much lately, but over the years I've done this with a number of magazine and website editors. Now my most common writing tool, I don't care what operating system I'm using. I bounce back and forth. I'm 75% Linux, 25% Windows, let's say.
Right.
And I like Bluefish, which is
HTML editor.
HTML editor, text editor. I write text. And if I send that to an editor who uses Word, they see it as a Word document.
Oh, well, that's what Word sees it as.
Yeah, well, so do they.
And they're happy.
I'm happy too.
There's also a difference though in that you can write. So it's not like the stuff comes in and someone feels like, oh God, what is he saying? I mean, one of the challenges for me is like, you send me something, I can read it. But I get sometimes, stuff from a first-time author, they've never written anything longer than a paper in school before. And it's like, I don't know what they're talking about. I need to restructure this whole thing. Okay,
now is that better or worse with the FOSS crowd, or does it matter?
I think actually the people who are like Linux people, or they're doing, I don't even know what FOSS means anymore. But what I think about is like when I go to, an open source show, I'm hanging out with a bunch of geeks. Typically I find, like, I just came back from LinuxCon, which was not necessarily the geekiest of the Linux meetup, but you have always a crowd there, right?
Yeah.
Once you've got the people who are very well educated, care an awful lot about their work, my experience with a lot of people, and this is not to diss people who don't use it, of course, but I'm thinking back to books that I've done recently. Often I find that it's a crowd of people who are very precise and who care about learning something and doing something well. Maybe that's because they know that in the open source community, if they don't do it well, they're going to be flamed into oblivion. So it's like, better do it right before you post it. So I think it might be fair to say, certainly I'm just thinking as I speak, that like for example, the author of my Perl book, very precise. How Linux works, extremely precise. Linux command line, he basically did the entire book on his own. Beautiful book. My Python authors, they write really good books because they're very careful and they actually care deeply about what they're writing about. Like, it's not just a passing fad. They're not just jumping on a bandwagon like people who write about web development tools. You get really invested in one tool and then the tool goes away. The company gets bought, the tool gets closed. But Linux is still Linux. And if you're looking at low-level stuff, kernel-level stuff, it's still Linux. Or even one of my most amazing writers ever, Michael Karras, who wrote Linux Programming Interface. The book is 1,600 pages long, and it's amazingly good. Like, that's an incredible tome of system and network programming. So if you look at the kind of stuff that we've produced, I mean, these are real feats. These are like amazing, amazing titles that have stood the test of time and will continue to. Like, How Linux Works sold in the Retrieve edition for like 12 years, 10 or 12 years, without needing an update.
Wow.
Yeah, every year. Like Wicked Cool Shell Scripts, which is, it's a similar type of thing. That book has probably sold for at least 10 years or more, and we're finally updating that. So that's pretty great. Whereas, unfortunately, certainly if we're to compare it to the Windows world, one of the challenges with books that I've done on Windows-based tools is that the tool changes. The person doing it didn't really care to begin with because they're just making stuff work. And it's like, we're not keeping pace with things. Or I've even had a book released with beta code in it, even though the product had been out for like 4 months.
Oh.
That was a Windows product. That was not when you're talking to like an open source person and you tell them like, this is wrong, they might be like, oh God, I have to fix that. And they'll actually fix it. So I really like the open source. Yeah, I mean, again, I don't know how to define the community, but I like the community of writers who actually care about the stuff that they're doing because I care about it.